Let us consider this Google Test application. The function under test here will be this add num function. In order to achieve 100% line coverage for the add num function, the first test cases should have equal value of a and b, which will hit this line here. And the second test case should be of parameters a and b being not equal, so it will reach here as combining these two test case run results to 100% line coverage. We can see here one existing Google test case. It is invoking the add num function with this parameter. And the second test case is here, invoking with parameters 3 and 4. And together, this call to the add num function shall result into an accumulated line coverage of 100%. First, let me build the application and generate a BDF. Now, I will use the parseof Cpptest trace to generate a BDF file. We will use the generated BDF file to load this project into the parseof IDE. The BDE file is just a text file that lists the source codes of the project. We have a BDF. Let's take a look at the BDF very quickly. And we have the listing of our source code here. Once the BDF has been generated, I will launch the parseof IDE and I will create a Eclipse workspace and associate this workspace to this project. I will write the workspace in this location and I will decide to use this workspace folder name. Initially, the workspace is not associated to the project. First, let me set the verbosity console to high. Once the workspace is created, we need to associate this workspace to the project by loading the BDF. We have this create a project from a build data file. And locate the BDF that was generated, this BDF file. Make sure that the compiler family is correct. I will click Auto Detect, and now it has updated to GCC 13. If you have problem detection, just drop down and select the compiler family. Click Finished. We just created a workspace and associated the workspace to the project. Let's take a look at the main.cpp file. Here it is. You will notice that the GTS enable preprocessor macro needs to be defined in order to invoke the Google test case. To enable this macro, I will go to parseof instrumentation settings. And this would be the location where additional flags needs to be passed during an instrumented build. Take note that there are two builds generally here. The first is the build of the application as it is without instrumentation, that is your application. And the second build is the instrumented build, that is when parseof instruments your code. So in the instrumented build, I will pass the GTest enable preprocessor macro. Okay, done. Now, the idea here, our plan of action here is to run to executable. Here, it just happens to be one executable, but it could be two executable. And then each run of these executable shall accumulate or collect each individual coverage log into a known location. And together, these accumulated log, coverage data log as written into that known location will be used to generate the report for the combined coverage run. That's the plan. So first, let me customize the application monitoring. Application monitoring, by the way, is a Parasoft feature that instruments the application as it is without any test cases. I will customize build and run application with coverage monitoring. Right click and duplicate. To avoid confusion, I will put my prefix here and then go to the execution tab. Under execution tab, go to runtime tab. In this tab, select this checkbox, archive, test, and coverage results. Take note of this location. This should be the common location for the two execution runs that we will be doing right now. Each individual execution runs will write into this location for the accumulation. Apply, close. Now, I will customize another test rule. This time, I will customize the run unit test. To avoid confusion again, I will put the my prefix here. And then again, go to execution tab and then go to the runtime tab. And in this tab, check the archive test and coverage results. So this will share the location as to the previous one. Apply, close. Now we can run application monitoring right now and it will gather code coverage, but we could not yet run the run unit test because there is no uh, unit test in this application. We have existing Google test cases. Let me create a parse test case then. I will select this file, main.cpp, and then create an empty uh, test suite, which is an empty test case. It is a container of test cases. Now that a test suite is created, I will add a test case, which will call to the add now function. And take note that the Google test alone will invoke add now with parameters 4 and 4. So we will create a second test case here. Here is our function of interest. And then we'll specify that the parameter should be 3 or 4. So now we have two invocations to the adnum test case. Here in our unit test, which will pass 3 and 4. And the first one is in the application monitoring, which uses Google Test and passes the parameters 4 into 4. We are now ready to execute these two test runs and gather the collected code coverage of these two test runs. First, I will run the application monitoring. which will run the entire application as it is. Since the GTest enable is activated in this macro, it will call into the Google test cases of your application here. And here it is. And then secondly, I will call into the test case here, test adnum, and I will use the my run unit test. So notice that the coverage has changed because these are two test runs. But because we enable archiving, the accumulated coverage data that was gathered across these two test runs is in that location. You can access it in the file system. Now we need an intermediate step, which is to load those archive results. Right click, Parasol using utilities. So you go here in the utilities and then load archive results. What this is trying to do is in the first run, it writes coverage data into the known location. In the unit test run, it could be a different executable. It runs coverage, it writes coverage data to the same location. So the coverage log file, you will notice, will increase in size across test run in that known location. So you load the archive results. And because it will use the combined coverage data gathered across two test runs, you will notice that it combines the Parsoft, the coverage generated by Parsoft unit test, as well as the coverage generated by the Google test. So in the coverage tab here, you'll see that we have 100% for the addNum function, and it has tried to generate a report, HTML report, and this focus on the main.cpp, and we will see that our main addNum function has 100% line coverage and statement coverage. So in this session, I have shown that two test runs accumulate gathered coverage data by writing to a known location. And let's try to find where that location is. That location is in the workspace. So I'll go here and it's in archive folder. And here it is. So this metadata, the coverage log, these two coverage log files are the individual coverage log that was collected by individual test runs written in the location and the and combined to generate an accumulated uh, coverage result. So to recall, we enable that by creating a customized rule here in our user define in the application monitoring. We check this archive test and coverage. So here, that is what represents that location. In the unit test testing also, and it has the same location, see. So it write covers data to the very same location, and together we invoke the utilities, the archive results, this rule here, to read from that location and generate infer and accumulated code coverage across two test execution. Thank you, and this is all for this session.